The Story of the Dragon and the Swan, a story told through piano and prose by Christian Roovers, narrated by Caitlin and Christian Roovers. Once upon a time, more than 1,000 years ago, a cosmic fortune teller with an amethyst ring on her long, bony finger loomed over her crystal ball. Suddenly, two spirits approached out of the darkness and whispered,
"Spirit life is surreal, but please, sweeten the deal. There must be something more."
The fortune teller knew exactly what to do. She held up a playing card in one hand and a coin in the other, and instructed the dissatisfied spirits. "If you choose the card and it's black and white, you will be born anew and experience the splendor as well as the pangs of earthly life. If you choose the card and it's red, you will be eternally forgotten." Next, the fortune teller held up a shiny gold coin. "Choose the coin and you will live forever in the spirit realm of eternity," she said as she winked a wrinkled eye. The two spirits weighed their options.
"The stakes are rather high,"
thought the first. "What use is a gold coin to us spirits?" wondered the second. After much deliberation, they chose the card. As the fortune teller turned the card between her fingers, she revealed its opposite side. The spirits gasped. The card was black and white. 1,000 years later, once upon a time, there lived a dragon who spent his days guarding gold for which he had no use. As was expected of dragons, he kept beautiful sirens under his fiery duress. The dragon was fierce, and he made an excellent guard. He was also wise. At this time, there also lived a swan, similarly befuddled not by lust but by lack. Her countenance fell each evening when moon magic would fail her. She could neither heal nor fly, and she hadn't been able to in a long time. The moon did not cast its blessings on the swan healer, because instead of helping the people in her village, she spent every night developing potions intended to restore her ability to fly. The swan kept her mastery of medicine to herself, and sadly, each morning her powers faded like relics of the past. One warm evening, the dragon's flames burned brightly. Golden pools reflected light into the night sky for all to see. Colors entered the land and painted the air with illuminated dragon lights. The swan saw the lights and felt in herself the dragon's fiery blast. She knew the colors signified transformation. She followed the forest path toward the lake to look more closely. Fading dragon lights glowed blue, green, and yellow, illuminating the water's surface, fading as she watched. From across the lake, the dragon, freed from his shiny things, began to see a small beacon of pure white light for the first time. He spotted it not far from where the swan was waiting nearby. The dragon followed it quickly down the path. The swan followed the same forest path whose darkness contrarily deepened behind her. The dragon and the swan wound through corridors beneath a canopy of sweeping tree branches until they arrived at the table in the woods. The swan's light floated above the table and illuminated their faces as their eyes locked. A strange, familiar feeling arose as if they had been here once before. As they looked upward, they gazed deep into the pools of each other's eyes. The light grew. It cast an even brighter aura. It danced all around them as they followed it to and fro until it sunk into the surface of the wooden table. Then, with a spark like the striking of a match, an inscription glowed the words of the enchantment. Apace et esse. Forgotten words that meant their journey had merely begun. The night fell silent. All had settled when a boundary spirit burst through a tear in the darkness, scourging the silence with her liminal call. The forest floor rustled and low-hanging branches rattled. The call grew louder and louder, but only the dragon and the swan could hear its piercing cry. The spirit raced back and forth before them, demanding their attention. The cry echoed on and on, like forgotten voices roaming in their ears, until the spirit's dance slowed to an eventual halt. And then silence. A crack of a fallen tree branch startled them, and they looked upon two yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. A voice whispered,
Welcome to the world beyond the veil.
The Trickster. The dragon and the swan entered the world beyond the veil, where colors whirled and lightning cracked. It was terrific and beautiful, dreamlike and surreal. It was unlike anything they could have ever imagined. The animals were nearly unrecognizable, and many of the plants shifted shapes. With each step they took, they saw spring buds unravel and drip with tiny drops of dew. Each was in rhythm with the next. The Trickster, a formidable character, ruled this terribly wonderful place. He loved nothing more than to torment his guests with tricks, grave, awful, and terrible tricks. Enchanted by the beauty of this world, the dragon and the swan danced about, taking in every last detail. It was perfect. Out of thin air, the Trickster appeared between them and pushed them apart. His eyes darted back and forth.
Ha ha ha! I see you have come to the world beyond the veil.
He said.
What makes you think you deserve my prize?
Like a flash of light, the Trickster disappeared and reappeared, swooping in and coming face to face with the dragon. The Trickster snarled through a grin of stained and jagged teeth. His voice deepened as he leaned in closer to the dragon's face.
I asked, what makes you think you deserve my prize?
The dragon grew angry, stomped his feet, and puffed a cloud of smoke through his widened nostrils. The swan stepped forward and spoke.
The spirit led us here. We followed her light to the table in the woods.
Ah,
replied the Trickster, turning his head slowly.
Are you sure it's not for your darkness you were brought here?
He quickly disappeared. Suddenly, where the Trickster had stood, thick walls of stone rose up to the sky. The confines soared hundreds of feet upward. Fear overcame the dragon and the swan, and they could no longer see nor hear one another. The Trickster returned.
What makes you think you can pass my test?
He had played this trick many times before, and nobody, even after the noblest attempts, succeeded. The Trickster would steal their money or make them his servants. He continued,
Pass my test and I will award you an unearthly concoction of my own making. A potion so powerful it will allow its possessor to realize vast abilities within. I'm talking about unlimited potential.
He snarled.
Pass the test and you will receive the elixir conjunctio oppositorum,
he said as a wicked smile wound tightly across his face.
If you fail, you will die.
On the swan's side of the wall, the Trickster laid 4 sickly servants. He said to the swan,
Use your powers to heal these servants, or the dragon will suffer a ghastly fate, and all that could have been in the world of black and white will be lost. Or betray your scaly friend and return home with the power of flight restored.
His face beamed with arrogance. The swan, in order to shield herself from the trickster's gaze, curled her slender neck and lowered her eyes. The trickster vanished through the wall and laid down 8 piles of lead. He snickered in the dragon's ear.
Transform these piles of lead into gold, or the swan will suffer a ghastly fate, and all that could have been in the world of black and white will be lost. Or
He bargained.
Betray your feathered friend and return home with the power of dynamic magnetism. Behold inconceivable power.
The dragon grew angry and flapped his horned wings. His chest heaved and he drew a large breath that wreathed the trickster in flames. The trickster disappeared again unscathed. With determination, the dragon dug his claws into the soil beneath him. He breathed heavily and surged the hottest, most intense flame he had ever blasted. The heat melted the lead into pools, but they did not shimmer like gold. Next, the swan folded her wings above the head of each of the dying servants. Moon Magic's healing rays emitted from her feathers, but she was unable to heal the servants. The trickster returned, and seeing them struggle, gruffed a smoky laugh. He jumped up on the wall and called down to the dragon and the swan.
Let me give you a key.
His voice echoed. The trickster removed a ring from his finger and dropped it. It clinked and clanked its way to them, one worn-out brick at a time. At once, a strange feeling grew in them. The ring was familiar to them, but why? What was it about the shimmer of the amethyst's violet flame? Why did the glittering gold irk them? It was all too familiar, painfully so. The trickster peered down at them and laughed hysterically.
This world beyond the veil is surreal. But please sweeten the deal. There must be something more.
He mocked. The trickster's rewards grew more intriguing to the dragon and the swan. Night fell in the world beyond the veil. The swirling colors in the sky slowly churned and all became dark. Fox with a frog in his throat. Splish, splash, a frog came hopping by to soak in the newly formed puddles. The frog was rather small and light green. His glistening skin was decorated with an exquisite band of gold that ran the length of his body up to his eye. The frog hopped right past the sleeping swan and carried on his way. A wide-eyed fox, hungry as ever, ran after it. He rustled past the swan and awoke her. She saw his wiry mask and inhaled quickly. He too was startled.
I didn't mean to wake you,
said the fox with his palms out in defense.
I'm just looking for a snack,
he said calmly. The fox's fingers curled like a wave moving from one end of his paw to the other, and the tips of his nails clicked together. The swan immediately noticed lunar symbols on his palms. Moon magic. You've learned moon magic, haven't you?
At this moment that I stand before you, I wait,
the fox admitted to the swan, lowering his eyes and smiling. The swan, a bit confused, replied reverently, Maybe you could heal sickly servants? The fox replied,
But Swan, you already have.
She fell back to sleep, comforted by the morning and the moon. Dawn broke shortly after. The Temptress. Meanwhile, an old woman with a weathered cane entered the swan's chamber. Because she could take on infinite forms, the trickster forced her to conspire with him, even though she wasn't particularly deceptive in her own right. Why won't you betray your friend? She asked, attempting to persuade the swan. Isn't it enough that you could be freed and return home? The trickster is merciful. He will do as he promises and restore your flight. Her old voice wavered. The swan didn't say a word in reply. Then the old woman transformed into a beautiful siren, like those the dragon had guarded back home, which now felt like a long, long time ago. The Temptress appeared a goddess, rare and unusual, unlike any woman he had ever seen. She said in a sultry voice, Why won't you betray your friend? The Temptress moved slowly toward the dragon, looking deeply into his eyes. Isn't it enough that you could be freed and return home? The trickster is merciful, and he will do as he promises. Think of what you could do with all of that power, she said as her voice grew stronger. She firmly gripped the dragon's shoulders with her fingers as her face moved in toward his. Slowly, she leaned back. Streams of condensation left the dragon's nostrils as he placed the trickster's ring on one of his claws. While pacing back and forth, the dragon muttered to himself,
Apace ad esse, apace ad esse, apace ad esse.
He had been thinking of the inscription on the table in the woods. The left side of the Temptress's mouth formed a gentle smile, and her eyes widened as she proclaimed, Non valet consequentia. If you had read the inscription on the other side of the table, you would know the completion of the enchantment. Apace ad esse non valet consequentia. Hastily, the Temptress transformed once more. This time, she appeared like a magnificent angel, plated with protective armor and a shield. She blasted a hole in the trickster's wall with unearthly magic, and said to the dragon and the swan, Hurry, before he returns! Moved by the two creatures, she unclasped her necklace, which held on it a silver amulet containing the elixir conjunctio oppositorum, a reddish-orange cloudy liquid. She handed the elixir to the swan and said the words, There is no taste of which is sweeter than a single drop of this elixir, but a single drop upon twin tongues, scale and feather join as one. Beware! She leaned in closely between their gathered faces and whispered, You need to run! A powerful potion. The dragon and the swan barreled as quickly as they could to escape, but the trickster noticed what had happened and was gaining on them. The swan clutched the necklace tightly in her wing. Bubbles rose in the liquid. The trickster's elixir was becoming more and more volatile. Seeing they were making off with the prize, the trickster barked to the Temptress.
After them, guard the threshold.
The Temptress stood firmly with her shield raised in front of the portal between worlds. Let's drink the elixir. It's the only way, the swan pleaded with the dragon. In desperation, she uncorked the vial and drank from it. She offered the potion to the dragon. As soon as the elixir touched the swan's beak and dripped on the dragon's forked tongue, it began taking effect. The dragon and the swan swirled into a twisted ball of forms. They morphed and wrapped around each other until out of an implosion, a chimerical beast emerged and stomped forward. This beast was most powerful and destructive. The two had become a feathered serpent with armored scales and glistening white feathers along its wings. The enormous beast took flight and headed toward the sky, to escape the trickster, the temptress, and their world beyond the veil. The trickster hurried after them quickly. His feet boomed and his jagged teeth shone between tensely curled lips.
How dare you steal the elixir?
The trickster was gaining speed, but anxiously so. Feeling things were getting out of hand, he begged the temptress.
Stop them!
Obediently, she followed after them. She caught up to the feathered beast, which displayed long carnivorous teeth and broad white wings. In its eyes, she saw the dragon and the swan. A single claw had grown around the trickster's amethyst ring like a tree would grow around a chain. She remembered. "The amethyst! Ignite the amethyst!" the temptress implored. The beast inhaled and blasted a flame, hot with violet hues. As the fire blasted, the ring burst open with a ray of light, which reflected upward and tore a hole in the sky. A jagged crack arced across the sky, which sounded like exploding glass. The beast flew upward toward the legion in the world beyond the veil, to escape to the world of black and white. As the trickster began to catch up with them, he shouted,
No!
The crack in the sky repaired itself and closed before him. He clenched his fists and fell to his knees.
No!
The trickster winced.
No pathetic creature of black and white defies me!
Little did he know the unity of opposites was capable of such tremendous power in the world beyond the veil. Return to the village. The beast traveled at lightning speeds as it fell from the sky and smashed into the table in the woods. It slowly separated back into the dragon and the swan, but the two had gained powers, not unlike the gifts promised by the trickster. The dragon's flames remained violet, but could now transform objects into anything he imagined. The swan's wings were full, and all of her feathers were tipped with gold. Her power of flight had been restored. Several severed scales toward the end of the dragon's tail were bleeding.
Do you think I'll be okay?
You are already healed. The swan crossed her wings and emitted a healing ray. This morning, moon magic worked, and the dragon's wound healed. The swan vowed on that day, "I will never take my powers for granted." Years passed while the dragon and the swan did kind works with their powers. There was no need for medicine in the village because the swan could heal the sick and the dragon provided wealth in dark times by performing magical transformations. More than 1,000 years passed, and the dragon and the swan did many wondrous things. They reflected on their adventures and over time began to grow weary. One day, the dragon and the swan decided to go for a walk deep in the forest. They found themselves walking down one of the old forest corridors, now completely overgrown with foliage and logs from fallen trees. At the end of the path, sitting on an old table, which was now almost entirely covered with lichen and moss, was a single red card.
"Please, sweeten the deal,"
a gentle voice whispered as a cool wind passed by them. The dragon and the swan locked eyes and thought about all they had been through together. In desperation, they reached for one another, but they began to fade away. They disappeared from the world of black and white until neither feathers nor scales remained. They were eternally forgotten. Left behind was an amethyst ring set in gold, which dropped to the ground. Upon striking the ground, it rolled into a remaining piece of the table, and an inscription glowed the words of enchantment. A passe ad esse non valet consequentia. Forgotten words that meant their journey had merely begun. The end.